folder. So that's how this Mi-DevEnv folder came into being. And then basically we just copy all the files out onto our local drive. So after copying the Mi-DevEnv files into your installation folder, you then need to configure parameters and product keys so that it's ready to use in your local environment. And once you've set those parameters, I'll show you how to do that in a second, I really need to stress and double stress and triple stress that you have to double check your parameters and product keys. Make sure everything's good, because once it's set, you'll very rarely have to come back and change anything in these files. But if you get it wrong, your virtual machine setup or product installation will fail, either because you've got some settings wrong or your product keys are invalid, and it will just frustrate you. So it really is worth going through these next few steps very carefully and then double checking just to make sure that all's well. So let's take a look first of all at the products keys files, and the products key file is stored in the MDE settings folder. So that's where this file comes from. So remember again, our installation files folder has Mi-DevEnv. In Mi-DevEnv we have a settings folder. In the settings folder we have our parameters and product keys. So what Mi-DevEnv needs to know is for each of your installed packages, what's the product activation key that's used to activate that product. So here's the product key for CRM 2011, and you'll need to use your product key or even go to the Microsoft site and find a trial key. So for CRM, Exchange, SQL 2012, Server 2008 R2, different versions of SharePoint and Office and so on, we have to record all of those product keys. The parameters key is, parameters file is by far the most critical file. It's a comma separated file, so it's very simple to read, and I think the names make it fairly easy to understand what each of the parameters do. And what we've done with the parameters file is put the stuff at the top which you're most likely to change and the stuff at the bottom which you're least likely to change. But on the first time, it's worth you going down every one of these settings and putting your preferred values in. And for example, if you're outside of Western Australia, you're going to need to change the time zone. If you're outside of Australia, you're going to need to input your locale and so on. So that's the kind of detail I'm talking about to make sure that your virtual machine setup goes perfectly well at the moment that you've set your parameters and product keys up. So let's take a quick look down at some of the key aspects here. This MDE dev server is an alias for a virtual machine which I'm going to create in a moment called MDE apps. And you'll see that MDE server is used in a number of places throughout this file. For example here, so that if we create an Exchange server, anybody that needs an Exchange server will know that the alias to use is MDE dev server, and that will ultimately resolve to this machine name. So if I change this machine name here, it will automatically be realized all the way through the parameter file. So here we go again. With CRM, for example, CRM will need a database server, and I've told Mi-DevEnv that the database server is the MDE dev server, and that will be resolved to the virtual machine name MDE apps. So we can change our machine once, and again it will be changed everywhere through the file. Here we're telling Mi-DevEnv what the name of the virtual switch is, or the virtual network in Hyper-V, which setting to use for the virtual machines which are created. Here this setting says for a domain controller that's created, what's the static IP address of that domain controller? And then what's the IP of our default gateway? Then we start to get into the nuts and bolts of what's the virtual host that we're talking to from Mi-DevEnv. So what's the machine that provides the hosting for the virtual servers and so on. And then as we talked about our installation folder earlier, so our install files folder, which is on our local disk here, that needs to be set up as a UNC, as a network share, so that virtual machines can see it, and therefore Mi-DevEnv will be able to come here and read the installation files. This is now the username and password which has access to this network share. So these settings will need to be changed in your environment. We talked earlier about the virtual machine root folder with the templates, machines and drives, and this is the path to each of those key folders. So Mi-DevEnv, when it's creating a virtual machine, will know where to come to get the template, which is the base image. It'll know where to put the virtual machine configuration file, and it will know where to store the virtual drives, all according to your preferences. Here now we get to some settings which are probably less likely to change over time, and that is what's your development domain going to be called. So when we create a domain controller with Mi-DevEnv, the domain will be called dev.local. We don't need to put the .local here, just the NetBIOS name of the domain itself. Then there's a domain path, which is basically the LDAP lookup to find the domain. So there's the container there that says the dev, for example, is what that will resolve to, and the local which comes after that. A number of times you might need to tell products what your organization is called. So when you install a Windows operating system, it will want to know what's your organization. If you install CRM, it wants to know what the friendly name is of your organization and also what the unique name of the organization is. A number of products need an SMTP server and an Exchange server, and again, that will be resolved back to your development server, which is stated at the top of the parameter file. This is a flag here to say that you want to assign a static IP to the domain controller, which is standard practice, and then your subnet mask. Here we store the name of the organizational unit which Microsoft CRM will need to put certain settings and security groups in. Here we don't use the default port for CRM, which would have been 5555. Instead we've used 4444. That's because down the track K2 will need to use 5555 for its server communication. So all we're proving here is that we can configure CRM in quite a detailed manner, but we store these settings once and it's all automatic forever after that. I'm working with the guy that's building the Auto SP installer. That's a fantastic project on CodePlex. You should go and look that up. But this tells me where I would need to go and patch some install files to enable automatic installation of SharePoint. That's a work in progress at the moment, so don't pay too much mind to that for now. But ultimately, when you are installing SharePoint, what you'll need is a passphrase. You'll need a port for the admin site, a contact email address, and those will be some of the basic things which you configure in Mi-DevEnv, so in turn it will configure the Auto SP installer, and again everything will run automatically. Further down, once we've got the K2 installers up and running, this will be what the service account is called for the K2 application pool. And then your locale, so this is our time zone for Perth in Western Australia, our locale for Australia. The user, so again when you're installing a Windows operating system, it asks you for a user and you can put that detail here. Here we're saying what's the virtual memory by default that's assigned to any new virtual machine. Now clearly 512 megs isn't going to be enough for most instances, but it's the default, so feel free to specify more memory for your virtual machines. But if you don't, then Mi-DevEnv will at least have a healthy starting point, at least to get the operating system up and running and to sysprep the image, so that later using your virtual machine tools you can increase the amount of RAM available. My preference is to have virtual machines not use Windows Update, so this setting 3 says turn Windows Update off. Here then is my default password, which is used inside all of the virtual machines and on the development domain. The development domain then also, well, it's building virtual machines, needs a login created, so that when the machines do log in and they do their sysprep and they do their software installation, it's this account and this password which are occasionally used to facilitate that process. When the virtual machine, which is based on any template, is switched on for the first time, it does a sysprep. And once that sysprep process is complete, it's this batch file which gets executed, and that's really what kicks off then all the Mi-DevEnv magic, which then installs all of the different software packages that you've requested. Also, when you're building server operating systems, it's possible to add features to those operating systems, such as the .NET framework, application server roles, and so on. And as there are quite a few of those, I thought it would be quite useful to add those as a default setting in the parameter file. Again, they can be overridden on the command line used to build virtual machines, but to make that command line as short and succinct as possible, it's also a good idea to use this default setting to make those command lines as abbreviated as you possibly can. So once you've edited these settings, if you save that file, again just as a reminder, that goes back in your Mi-DevEnv MDE settings folder. The next thing that you're going to want to do is prepare your virtual machine templates. So a template is just that, it's a virtual machine which has an operating system installed. And once the operating system's installed, you can then set the Mi-DevEnv trigger, that is to say that a script is run, it sets some registry values, and then it shuts the machine down. You then copy that to a safe place where it's used as a template, and every time any machine uses that template as the base and it's switched on, the machine will sysprep itself and install all of your software packages automatically. So let's have a quick look at how to do that. And in order to do that, we basically need to use Windows Hyper-V. We tell Windows Hyper-V that we want to create a new virtual machine, and I might call my new virtual machine MDE base because it's a base template, SRV because it's a server, and then 2012 because I'm going to install Server 2012 on it. This is going to be stored in my default location for now. Here's the amount of memory by default for the startup, and it's not Mi-DevEnv that we're concerned with here. Bear in mind, all we're doing is creating a template machine for Mi-DevEnv to use, hence this amount of RAM here isn't the default amount of RAM from the parameters file, so there's no connection with Mi-DevEnv and this virtual machine just yet. Okay, we'll tell it then that we want to connect the machine to the network, so there's my virtual switch which is stated in my parameter file. And then we're going to tell it that we need to create a virtual hard disk. We might use 64 gigabytes as a sensible amount of disk space. We'll tell it that we do want to install an operating system, but it's from an image file. And the ISO image that I'm going to use is for Windows Server 2012. So that's now created my virtual machine. What I need to do now is to turn that machine on, and when the machine starts, because the ISO image is attached as a local DVD CD drive, it starts to boot the Windows setup for Server 2012. So what I'm going to do now is move through this quite quickly, and I will jump forward to save you time. You obviously don't want to see me going through all of these different settings and so on, but in a few moments what you'll see is that the virtual machine will be completely set up and ready for me to set that trigger, so I'll come back to you when I'm at that point. Okay, so here I am now with my Windows Server 2012 installation almost complete. I'm just going to input a default password which really at this stage doesn't matter too much, because Mi-DevEnv is going to sort all of this stuff out for me in a second. Okay, here we go. So